47 seconds. That was how long the torpedo took to cross from our strike cruiser to their hull. I counted each one. Not out of fear. Fear had been processed out of us during the insertion drills. The ones where they sealed us in training pods and fired blanks at the walls until we stopped flinching. But because counting was all consciousness could do in that space. The torpedo's interior measured 3 meters wide, 2 meters high, 11 meters long. 68 of us packed inside. I felt the heat of the man pressed against my left side through 2 layers of carapace armor. His breathing came fast, too fast. I logged it. No intervention was possible. We were already committed. The impact, when it came, was not loud. That surprised me. I had expected, the training simulations had led me to expect, something dramatic. Instead, there was a dull metallic compression, a sensation of the world pressing inward from all sides. And then the melter charges at the torpedo's nose began their work. I could not see them. None of us could see anything, except the back of the helmet in front of us, and the dim, red emergency lighting running along the torpedo's ceiling. But I felt the heat. 41 degrees Celsius inside the compartment. 43. 46. The melter charges were cutting through their hull plating. The metal screamed as molecular bonds dissolved. 50 degrees. 52. Someone vomited. I heard it splash inside a helmet, heard the choking that followed. The man could not remove his helmet. None of us could. Procedure-dictated helmets remained sealed until hostile atmosphere was confirmed neutralized. The choking continued for perhaps 15 seconds. Then it stopped. I noted the cessation. The body remained upright, held in place by the pressure of the men surrounding it. The forward ramp dropped. I know it dropped because the man in front of me lurched forward, which meant the men in front of him had begun moving, which meant the ramp had deployed and the first rank was advancing. I followed. We all followed. There was no choice involved. The torpedo's interior pressure was higher than the corridor beyond. Deliberate design, meant to prevent enemy counterfire from penetrating back into the insertion tube. So we were pushed forward by simple physics. Men and air, both seeking equilibrium. The corridor was narrow. I measured it later, during the second boarding action, when I had time to observe such details. 2.4 meters. That was the width. Barely enough for 2 men to stand abreast if they turned their shoulders and did not carry standard assault loadout. We carried standard assault loadout. Shotguns with drum magazines, each shell packed with fragmenting submunitions designed to shred flesh without over-penetrating the hull. Frag grenades with yield limiters, combat knives. Some men carried portable void shields, though I never saw one successfully deployed in boarding action. The corridors did not permit the space required for proper setup. I saw the first man die before I fully cleared the torpedo. I think his name was Calix, or perhaps Carolus. The roster listed him as Trooper 1, 047. I archived the sound of his name, but not its spelling. He took 3 steps into the corridor, and something hit him center mass with enough force to throw him backward into the second rank. The impact produced a wet sound, like a boot coming out of thick mud. The men behind him kept moving. They had to. The pressure from the torpedo continued. Calix or Carolus fell and the line advanced over him. I felt his body under my left boot as I passed. The armor plating was still warm. The smoke came next. Not immediately. There were perhaps 4 or 5 seconds of clear air after we breached, enough time for visual identification of the corridor's basic layout. And then someone, one of theirs or one of ours, I cannot say which, deployed some form of obscurant. Gray-white fog filled the space from deck to ceiling. Visibility dropped to less than 2 meters. The man in front of me became a dark outline. The walls vanished entirely. I extended my left hand, found metal, used it to orient. The wall was cold, 31 degrees Celsius. We were in an unheated section. Life support was running minimal cycle. That told me something about their resource allocation, though I had no capacity to act on the information at that time. We pushed forward. The corridor did not curve. It ran straight for approximately 50 meters. I counted steps, estimated distance based on standard stride under combat load, and then terminated in an intersection. Three-way junction. Left, right, forward. We went forward because forward was where the resistance was thinnest. That was what they taught us. Engage along axis of least resistance until you secure the objective, or expire attempting to do so. No retreat. The torpedoes did not have reverse thrust. We were a projectile. Projectiles travel one direction. The shotgun fire started somewhere around the 30-meter mark. I did not see the muzzle flashes through the smoke. I heard them, short, flat cracks, rhythmic. Someone firing on controlled schedule. Defensive position pre-established. They had known we were coming. Of course they had known. You cannot hide a torpedo launch. The drive flare is visible across half a system. And they had positioned men in the corridor junctions with orders to bleed us. Simple mathematics. The corridor was a killing box. We were the targets. The equation solved itself. Men fell. I did not know their names. I had not learned their names during the 7-week transit to the engagement zone. Learning names was not part of the conditioning protocol. We were organized by number and function. I was Breacher 3, 014. The man to my right was Breacher 3, 015. He died at the intersection. Something took the top half of his helmet off. I registered the event peripherally. Movement in the smoke, a dark shape collapsing. But I did not stop. Stopping was not among the permitted behaviors. We returned fire. I discharged my shotgun 4 times in the first 30 seconds of corridor engagement. I do not know if I hit anything. The smoke made accuracy irrelevant. We were firing at sound, at muzzle flash, at best guess estimations of where targets might be standing. The shotgun's recoil was significant. Each discharge pushed me backward approximately 4 centimeters. I compensated by leaning forward before pulling the trigger. The man behind me pressed into my back, providing counterpressure. We moved as a unit. Individual agency was a luxury the environment did not permit. The smoke thinned slightly near the intersection, some property of the ventilation system, or perhaps a hull breach somewhere ahead, drawing atmosphere out of the section. I saw the defensive position for approximately 2 seconds. 4 of them, possibly 5, crouched behind portable barricades. Not proper fortifications, just supply crates and deck plating ripped up and propped at angles. They wore uniforms I did not recognize. Dark gray, undecorated. No insignia visible. Their shotguns were different from ours, longer barrels, tube magazines instead of drums. I noted the details because noting was what I had been trained to do when direct action was not required. We killed them, or they retreated. The sequence is unclear in my recollection. The smoke thickened again. Someone on our side deployed another canister. Proper procedure called for continuous obscurant in hostile corridors to degrade enemy targeting solutions. And when visibility returned, the barricades were empty. Bodies remained, 3 of them. The other 2 had withdrawn or had been dragged back by their comrades. I stepped over the barricade. My boot came down on something that compressed under the weight. I did not look down. The corridor beyond the intersection continued for another 40 meters, then split again. This time, we divided. Half the remaining force went left. I went right. No one gave orders. The division happened because the men at the front of the formation reached the junction, and some went one way and some went another. I followed the flow of bodies in my immediate vicinity. That was how movement worked in the corridors. You were part of a pressure wave. The wave moved and you moved with it, or you stopped and were crushed by the men behind you. This corridor was narrower, 2.1 meters. I measured by extending both arms. My fingertips brushed the walls on either side. The ceiling was lower as well. I was 183 centimeters tall before augmentation. After 187. The helmet added another 9. In that corridor, I had less than 20 centimeters of clearance. The space pressed down, confined, compressed. The air tasted like recycled sweat and propellant residue, and something else, something metallic that coated the back of my throat when I breathed through my mouth. We encountered the next defensive position 11 meters in. They had welded a bulkhead door half shut, leaving a gap approximately 60 centimeters wide. The gap was a kill channel. We had to funnel through single file. The first man who tried took fire from the far side. He jerked, stumbled, fell halfway through. His body blocked the gap. The second man tried to pull him back. The firing continued. The second man died, still holding the first one's equipment harness. I was fifth in line. I watched the third man die. I watched the fourth man die. Then it was my turn. I did not think. Thinking would have stopped me, and stopping was not permitted. I stepped over the bodies and pushed through the gap. My shoulders scraped the doorframe on both sides. Carapace plating screeched against metal. I felt the resistance. I felt my body compressed to fit the space. I felt the moment my chest cleared the threshold. The corridor beyond was darker, emergency lighting only. I saw muzzle flashes, 4 of them, elevated positions. They were standing on something. Supply crates again, or deck grating ripped up and stacked. The flashes were 3 meters away, point-blank range. I raised my shotgun and fired. The recoil jerked the barrel up. I do not know where the shot went. Not into any of them. I was still standing, which meant they were still firing, which meant I had missed. I fired again, adjusted aim lower. The muzzle flash from my weapon illuminated the corridor for a fraction of a second. I saw a face. Young. Younger than me. He looked. Afraid is the wrong word. Afraid implies an emotion I was trained not to project onto enemy personnel. He looked focused. He was solving the same equation I was solving. Kill or die. Simple mathematics. He fired. I felt the impact against my chest plating. The shot did not penetrate. Carapace armor, rated for small arms fire at ranges below 5 meters, provided the angle was not perpendicular. The angle was not perpendicular. I was advancing at an upward incline. The shot dispersed across the plate's surface. I fired a third time. He stopped firing. I advanced, stepped on his firing position. It was a crate. Ammunition, judging by the stenciled markings, though I could not read the specific designation, in the low light. The crate collapsed under my weight. I fell forward, hit the deck plating. My shotgun discharged. The shot went into the ceiling. I heard the ricochet, heard fragments patter against the walls, heard someone scream. Not me. Someone else, behind me or ahead of me. The corridors made directionality difficult to determine. I stood, checked my shotgun. The drum magazine had cracked, feeding mechanism jammed. I dropped it, drew my combat knife. That was what the close assault protocols dictated. If primary weapon fails in confined space, transition to blade work. Do not attempt to clear malfunction under fire. The blade does not jam. The blade does not require ammunition. The blade functions until the hand holding it stops functioning. The corridor continued. I continued. The man who had been behind me was no longer behind me. Someone else was there instead. I did not recognize him. Perhaps I had never seen him before. Perhaps he had been 40 men back in the original formation, and the 39 between us had all died, and now he was behind me, because that was where the flow had placed him. I did not ask. He did not ask. We moved. There was a sound ahead, mechanical, rhythmic. I identified it after approximately 3 seconds of exposure. Hydraulics. Bulkhead door closing. Someone had initiated lockdown protocol. They were sealing the section. If the door closed fully before we reached it, we would be trapped. The corridor behind us was filled with our own dead and whatever hostile forces had repositioned into our rear arc. Forward was the only direction. Forward was closing. I ran. The man behind me ran. We reached the door with perhaps 2 seconds remaining. The gap was 70 centimeters. 60, 50. I turned my shoulders and pushed through. The door's edge caught my equipment webbing. Held. I pushed harder. The webbing tore. I fell through into the space beyond. The man behind me did not make it. The door closed on him. I heard the sound his body made. I heard the hydraulics strain, then continue. The door sealed. The sound stopped. I was alone. That realization came slowly. I stood in a corridor identical to the previous corridor, 2.1 meters wide. Dark, emergency lighting only. But there was no one behind me, and no one ahead of me. And the door I had come through was now sealed, and would not open without authorization I did not possess. I attempted to access the control panel. It was dead, powered down, or perhaps damaged in the initial breach, or perhaps deliberately deactivated to prevent exactly what I was attempting. I assessed. Ammunition, none. Primary weapon, discarded. Secondary weapon, combat knife. Armor integrity, compromised webbing. Chest plate scored but functional. Helmet optics, partially occluded by condensation or smoke residue. Environmental status, hostile ship, unknown section, probable enemy forces ahead, and confirmed friendly forces behind impassable barrier. Operational status, combat effective. Psychological status, irrelevant. I did not permit myself to process psychological status during active engagement. I moved forward. The corridor extended 15 meters, then terminated in another door. This one was open. Beyond it was not another corridor. The space was larger. I estimated 4 meters by 6 meters. A compartment. Storage, judging by the empty supply racks along the walls. The lighting was better here. A single functioning luminator panel in the ceiling, flickering, but operational. I could see. He was sitting against the far wall. Enemy combatant, same uniform as the others. Dark gray, no insignia. His shotgun lay on the deck beside him. He was not holding it. He was holding his side. His hands were red. The deck around him was red. He looked up when I entered. We made eye contact. His expression was, I will not assign an emotion to it. His expression existed. I observed it. He observed me observing it. I raised my knife. Standard protocol. Neutralize all enemy personnel in secured spaces. He did not move. He said something. I did not understand the language. Not Gothic. Something else. A dialect I had not been trained to recognize. He said it again. Same words, same intonation. Still not Gothic, I advanced 3 steps. He raised his hand, the one not holding his side. Palm out. Fingers spread. Universal gesture. Stop. Wait. I stopped. Not because he asked me to. I stopped because I was recalculating the tactical requirement. He was incapacitated. He was not combat effective. He was bleeding out. I estimated blood loss at 2.5 liters, based on the pool size and spread rate, which meant he had perhaps 4 to 6 minutes of consciousness remaining before hypoxic termination. He was not a threat. Threat neutralization was not required. But protocol was protocol. I advanced another step. He spoke again. Different words this time. Faster. More urgent. Still not Gothic. Still meaningless to me. His hand dropped. He closed his eyes. His breathing was shallow, 13 breaths per minute, inadequate for tissue oxygenation under trauma conditions. He was dying. I was watching him die. I could expedite the process. The knife would take 3 seconds. One cut, properly placed. He would not suffer beyond the suffering already present. I did not cut him. I do not know why I did not cut him. Protocol required it. Tactical assessment supported it. Resource allocation. My time was finite. Remaining objectives existed. Every second spent in that compartment was a second not spent advancing toward mission completion. Demanded it. But I stood there and watched him breathe. 13 times per minute. 12. 11. His hand fell away from his side. The bleeding continued. The pool spread another 8 centimeters toward my boots. 10 breaths per minute. 9. His eyes opened. He looked at me again, said one word, just one, quietly. I did not understand it. He closed his eyes. 8 breaths per minute. 7. I counted each one. 6. 5. The interval lengthened. 4. 30 seconds between breaths now. 3. 45 seconds. 2. 1 minute. 1. He stopped. The bleeding continued for approximately 20 seconds after cessation of cardiac function. Residual pressure in the circulatory system. Then it stopped as well. I stood there for another 30 seconds, observed the body, confirmed cessation, logged the timestamp. 13:47 hours shipboard time. Enemy combatant, designation unknown. Status, terminated. Cause, exsanguination from abdominal trauma. Contributing factor, non-intervention by Imperial forces. That was me. I was the Imperial forces. I was the non-intervention. I turned and left the compartment. The corridor beyond continued for another 20 meters, then intersected with a larger passage, 3.8 meters wide, high enough that my helmet clearance was no longer a concern. This was a primary access corridor, ship's arterial system, the kind of space that connected vital sections. I heard sounds in both directions. To the left, weapons fire, distant but continuous. To the right, mechanical noise, heavy machinery operating under load. I went right. The mission objective was engineering spaces. Disable or control. Weapons fire meant active resistance, which meant resources dedicated to suppression. Mechanical noise meant operational systems, which meant the objective was still functional. The corridor sloped downward. I followed it for perhaps 100 meters. The mechanical noise grew louder. I passed several sealed compartments, tried the doors. All locked. Continued onward. The slope increased. 15 degrees. 20. I was descending into the ship's lower decks, closer to the engineering levels, closer to the objective. The temperature increased as I descended. 31 degrees became 34, 37, 40. The heat rose from below, conducted through the deck plating. Engineering spaces always ran hot. Plasma reactors, coolant systems cycling thermal waste, the accumulated heat of 1,000 machines operating in proximity. I felt sweat accumulate inside my body glove. The armor's cooling system was designed for void operations, not extended exposure to elevated ambient temperatures, I continued. Discomfort was not a valid reason to deviate from objective. I encountered the first of them at the bottom of the slope, not defenders, the opposite. He was running toward me, running up the corridor I was descending, and he was not armed. His uniform was different. Not dark gray like the defenders. Brown coveralls, stained with oil and what might have been coolant residue. Ship's crew, engineering section personnel. He saw me and stopped. We were 10 meters apart. His eyes were wide. He turned and ran back the way he had come. I followed. He led me through 3 turns, 2 more descending ramps, and finally into a large open space that I recognized immediately as an engineering junction. The compartment was perhaps 30 meters across, 20 meters high. Catwalks ran along the walls at multiple levels. Machinery filled the lower level. Coolant pumps, power distribution nodes, conduit bundles as thick as my torso, running along the ceiling and disappearing into the bulkheads. The temperature here was 43 degrees. The air vibrated with the sound of operating systems. I felt it in my chest, a low-frequency hum that resonated through armor and bone. There were more of them. Crew. Dozens of them, scattered across the catwalks and huddled near the far bulkhead. They saw me enter, and the ones nearest to me moved away, pressing back into the crowd. No one was armed. No one moved to engage me. They just watched, waited. I scanned the compartment for threats, found none. Only crew. Only the terrified machinery operators whose ship we had just violated with torpedo and melter charge. A door opened on the upper catwalk. 3 men emerged. These were armed. Not shotguns. Las rifles. Standard pattern, military grade. They took firing positions at the catwalk railing and aimed down at me. I raised my knife. Inadequate response. I knew it was inadequate. A blade against 3 rifles at 20 meters elevation. The mathematics did not favor survival, but the knife was what I had. I raised it. They did not fire. One of them shouted something, Gothic but heavily accented. I did not understand the words. He shouted again, different phrasing. Still incomprehensible. He gestured with his rifle. Down. He wanted me to put the knife down. I did not put the knife down. He gestured again, more emphatically. The other 2 adjusted their aim, sighting in, preparing to fire. I heard boots behind me. Multiple contacts. I turned my head, kept the knife raised, divided my attention between the threat ahead and the threat behind. 5 men emerged from the corridor I had just traversed. Imperial forces. Breaches. Same armor as mine, same loadout, minus the weapons they had expended or discarded during the push. The man at the front was Sergeant Valen. I recognized his voice when he spoke, even filtered through the Vox system. He told me to stand fast. He told the men on the catwalk to lower their weapons. He spoke Gothic clearly, command voice projection, the kind of tone that expected compliance. The men on the catwalk did not lower their weapons. Valen repeated the instruction. Still no compliance. The standoff held for perhaps 10 seconds. Then one of the men on the catwalk fired. The last bolt hit the deck plating 2 meters to Valen's left. Warning shot. Valen responded with his shotgun. The shot caught the railing near the shooter's position. Metal fragments sprayed outward. The catwalk rang like a bell. The other 2 men on the catwalk opened fire. Multiple las bolts, rapid succession. One hit the breacher to Valen's right in the leg. The man went down. The rest of us returned fire. The engagement lasted 11 seconds. I counted. The compartment filled with the crack of shotgun discharges and the snap hiss of last fire and the screaming of crew members trapped in the crossfire. 2 of the men on the catwalk died immediately. The third tried to retreat back through the door he had emerged from. Valen's third shot took him before he reached it. He fell against the railing, hung there for a moment, then toppled over. He hit the deck plating near the coolant pumps. The impact was wet. The crew panicked. They scattered, trying to reach the exits, but there were only 3 doors in the compartment, and we were blocking one, and the upper catwalk was now a kill zone, and that left only the far exit. They ran for it, pushed through the door in a crush of bodies. I saw 2 men fall and get trampled. The crowd pressed forward over them. Within 20 seconds, the compartment was empty except for us and the bodies, and the sound of machinery continuing its endless cycle. Valen ordered a sweep. We moved through the compartment methodically, checked every corner, every catwalk, every alcove where someone might be hiding. Found nothing. The crew had evacuated completely. The breacher who had been shot in the leg was still combat effective. The wound was superficial. Last fire had burned through the armor's joint seal, but had not penetrated deep enough to hit bone. Valen applied a field dressing, and we continued. We went up, took the catwalk to the upper level, passed through the door where the armed crew had emerged. Beyond it was another corridor, wider than the ones near the breach point, 3 meters across. High ceiling. Better lighting. We were in the ship's primary interior, past the outer defensive layers, into the operational heart. This was where the crew lived and worked. This was where control could be established. The corridor led to a junction, 6 passages branching off in different directions. Valen consulted the tactical overlay on his helmet display. I did not have access to the tactical net. My helmet had been damaged during the breach. The display was dead. I relied on Valen's directions. He chose the second corridor from the left. We followed. We encountered resistance 20 meters in, a barricade, properly constructed this time. Deck plating welded into overlapping sections, firing ports cut at tactical intervals. I counted 4 ports, estimated 4 defenders, possibly more in reserve. The barricade blocked the entire corridor width. No way around. No alternate route visible. We would have to go through. Valen did not hesitate. He ordered suppressing fire and charged. We followed. The training had been clear on this point. In confined boarding actions, momentum was everything. Hesitation was death. You pushed forward or you died in place. Those were the only options. We pushed. The defenders opened fire when we were 15 meters out. Last fire and solid projectiles. Something heavy. Possibly a stubber. The rounds sparked off the walls and ceiling. I felt impacts against my chest plate. Minor caliber. The armor held. I kept moving. 10 meters. The barricade loomed ahead. I could see movement behind the firing ports. Muzzle flashes. Here shouting in that same language I did not understand. 5 meters. Valen threw something. A grenade. Limited yield. It arced over the barricade and detonated behind it. The explosion was muffled, but the effects were immediate. The firing from the ports stopped. Valen hit the barricade at full sprint and climbed. We climbed with him. The metal was hot, freshly welded. It burned through my gloves where I gripped it. I did not let go. I pulled myself over the top and dropped down on the far side. 3 of them were down, dead or unconscious from the grenade's concussive wave. The 4th was standing, trying to bring his weapon to bear. Valen shot him. The man collapsed backward into a 5th defender I had not seen, had not accounted for in my initial estimate. The 5th man pushed the body aside and raised a lost pistol. He was young. Perhaps 18 standard years, perhaps younger. His hand was shaking. The Las pistol wavered. He was looking at Valen, then at me, then at the other breaches dropping down from the barricade behind us. 6 of us, 1 of him. The mathematics were clear. He lowered the last pistol, did not drop it, just lowered it, held it at his side. Valen shot him anyway. Center mass. The young man fell. Valen stepped over him and continued down the corridor. We followed. Standard procedure. Neutralize all combatants. Do not accept surrenders in active breach scenarios. Accepting surrender required resources for containment and guard. Resources were finite. The math did not support prisoner taking. I looked at the young man as I passed. His eyes were still open. He was still breathing. The shot had not killed him immediately. He would die, certainly. Last fire to center mass would cause catastrophic organ damage and thermal shock. But he would take several minutes to do it. He watched me pass. I did not stop. Stopping was not permitted. I followed Valen, and I left the young man to finish dying alone. The corridor continued for another 50 meters, then opened into a larger space. I recognized it immediately. Command deck. Not the bridge. We were not high enough in the ship's structure for that, but a secondary control station. Tactical Operations Center, perhaps, or Section Command. The compartment was 10 meters by 15 meters. Control stations lined the walls. Display screens showing ship system status, power distribution networks, damage control overlays. Most of the screens were dark. Those that still functioned showed red indicators. Critical systems failures across multiple sections. There were 7 crew members in the compartment. They were not armed. They stood near the central console, hands visible, postures non-threatening. One of them stepped forward. Older man. Gray hair, heavy build. His uniform bore rank insignia I did not recognize. He spoke. Gothic. Accented, but comprehensible. He said they were surrendering. He said they had no operational weapons. He said their defensive positions had been overrun, and further resistance was not tactically viable. He requested terms. He requested assurances that his crew would be treated according to standard conventions for captured combatants. He requested that we not execute them. Valen looked at him. I could not see Valen's expression behind his helmet, but I heard his breathing through the Vox link. Steady, controlled, he was processing the request, running the calculations. Prisoners required resources, but command personnel possessed intelligence value. The senior officer standing before us knew the ship's layout, its capabilities, its operational status. That knowledge had value. Value might outweigh resource costs. Valen accepted the surrender. He ordered the crew to move to the far corner of the compartment and remain there under guard. He detailed 2 breaches to watch them. The rest of us moved to the control stations and began assessing what we had captured. I did not know how to operate the systems. I had been trained in breaching, not ship operations. But I could read basic status displays. Power at 43%. Life support degraded. Hull integrity compromised in 7 sections. Weapon systems offline. Main drive functional but operating at reduced output. We had hurt them. The torpedo breaches, the fighting in the corridors, the deaths of their crew and the panic that followed. We had hurt them badly enough that their senior staff was surrendering rather than continuing resistance. The mathematics had shifted. We were no longer projectiles fired into enemy territory. We were occupation forces. We controlled this section of the ship. Valen established contact with command. I heard his side of the conversation through proximity to his Vox system. He reported our position, our status, the capture of the Tactical Operations Center. He reported the surrender of senior crew. He requested instructions. There was a delay. 20 seconds. 30. Then response came. The orders were clear. Hold. Position. Secure the section. Additional breach teams were inbound to adjacent sections. Once consolidation was complete, we would begin systematic clearance of remaining hostile areas. We held. That was what we did for the next 6 hours. Held the compartment, maintained guard over the surrendered crew, processed the dead bodies in the corridor outside. I participated in the body detail, dragged corpses out of the Tactical Operations Center and stacked them in a side passage where they would not obstruct movement. 17 bodies total, 14 theirs, 3 ours. The breachers who had died during the final push to reach this compartment. Their armor was scorched and punctured. I could see where the last fire had burned through, could see the damage. I did not remove their helmets, did not confirm identities. They were casualties. They were logged. That was sufficient. The other breach teams reached us 4 hours into the holding period. They had pushed through adjacent sections, secured multiple compartments, captured engineering spaces, and cargo holds. Together we controlled approximately 30% of the ship. The remaining 70% was still hostile or status unknown. Command ordered us to begin expansion. Push deeper, secure more territory, reduce their operational capacity to 0. We pushed. This time the resistance was lighter. Most of the organized defensive positions had been overrun in the initial breaching actions. What remained were isolated holdouts, small groups of crew members or security personnel who had barricaded themselves in compartments and hoped we would pass them by. We did not pass them by. We identified every sealed compartment, breached every door, cleared every space. Some resisted, most did not. The ones who resisted died. The ones who surrendered were detained and placed under guard in secured areas. I killed 4 more people that day. I remember 3 of them clearly. The 4th is less distinct in my recollection. Perhaps because he died quickly, or perhaps because by that point I had processed so much death that individual instances had begun to blur together. The first was in a crew quarters section. He was hiding under a bunk, armed with a wrench. He swung at me when I pulled him out. The wrench hit my helmet. The impact was insignificant. I stabbed him twice, once in the chest, once in the throat. He stopped moving. I pulled the wrench from his hand and tossed it aside. Continued the sweep. The second was in a storage compartment. He fired at us with a las pistol. Missed. I returned fire with a shotgun I had recovered from a dead breacher. Did not miss. The body fell into a stack of supply crates. I did not retrieve it. Not my responsibility. The body detail would process it later. The third was in a maintenance tunnel. He was running, trying to escape through the service passages. I pursued. Caught him after 30 meters. He turned to face me, unarmed. He said something. I did not understand the language. I shot him. He fell. I confirmed cessation and continued back to rejoin my unit. The 4th. I remember he was in a medical bay, or near one. There were Medicaid supplies nearby. He might have been wounded already. I do not clearly recall. He died. I moved on. By the 18th hour of the operation, we controlled 60% of the ship. By the 24th hour, 80%. The remaining 20% was inaccessible due to hull damage, decompression, or areas we had deliberately sealed off because clearance was not tactically necessary. The ship was ours. The crew had been subdued, captured, or killed. The objectives had been achieved. I stood in one of the main corridors, near the original breach point, and looked at what we had done. The walls were scorched. The deck was stained. Bodies had been removed, but the evidence of their deaths remained. Blood does not clean easily from textured metal. Neither does scoring from last fire or the carbon deposits from frag grenades. The corridor looked like what it was. A battlefield. A place where men had killed each other. in close proximity, for control of a steel tube suspended in the void. I thought about the young man with the last pistol, the one Vezin had shot after he lowered his weapon. I thought about the old officer who had surrendered and requested terms. I thought about the enemy combatant in the storage compartment who had bled out while I watched and counted his breaths. I thought about these things, and I tried to process what they meant. They meant we had succeeded. We had boarded an enemy vessel, fought through organized resistance, captured key sections, and established control. The ship would be salvaged or scuttled, depending on Command's assessment of its operational value. The surviving crew would be interrogated and then disposed of, according to standard procedures. We had performed our function. We had done what we had been trained and equipped and conditioned to do. That was what it meant. Nothing more. I told myself that was what it meant. I archived the thought, filed it alongside the memories of the narrow corridors and the smoke and the sound of hydraulics, closing on a man who had not moved fast enough. I archived all of it. Then I waited for the next set of orders. They came 6 hours later. New target, different ship, larger, heavier defenses, more crew. The mathematics were different, but the equation was the same. Board, kill, control. We loaded into the torpedoes and we launched. And 47 seconds later, we hit their hull, and the melter charges began cutting, and I counted the seconds, and the temperature rose, and someone vomited in their helmet, and the forward ramp dropped. And we pushed into the corridors, and the smoke and the killing began again. The second boarding was different. Not in method. The torpedo, the breach, the narrow corridors, the smoke, but in my awareness of what was happening. The first time I had been running calculations, processing tactical data, following training protocols as they had been drilled into me during the conditioning sessions. The second time I knew what the smoke would smell like. I knew the sound the body made when you stepped on it. I knew the exact temperature progression as the melted charges carved through hull plating. Knowledge made it worse. Or perhaps knowledge made it clearer. The distinction became irrelevant after the fourth boarding, then the fifth. Then I stopped counting boardings, the same way I had stopped counting individual deaths. This ship was larger, a merchant hauler retrofitted for military service. The corridors were wider in some sections, narrower in others, the layout inconsistent because it had been designed for cargo efficiency rather than tactical coherence. That inconsistency created problems. We cleared a wide passage, only to find it terminated in a maintenance shaft, barely large enough for a single man to crawl through. We breached into what the tactical overlay identified as a cargo bay and found it had been subdivided into dozens of smaller compartments with makeshift walls welded into place. Each compartment had to be cleared individually. Each one might contain hostile forces, or might be empty, or might be filled with terrified crew who surrendered immediately, or might contain one determined defender with a weapon who had decided dying was preferable to capture. I developed a method for the compartment clearing. I would approach the door, listen for 10 seconds, then breach fast, and move to the left while the man behind me moved right. We would sweep our respective arcs, confirm status, move to the next door. The method was efficient. We cleared 47 compartments in the first 3 hours, found hostiles in 11 of them, killed 9, captured 2. The captured ones were injured, not combat effective. We left them for the consolidation teams following behind us. In the 18th compartment, I found something that stopped me. Not a defender, not a threat. A chair. Just a chair. Bolted to the deck near a small table. The compartment was living quarters. Personal space. There was a narrow bunk against one wall. Storage lockers. The chair and table. On the table was a data slate showing a still image. Two men, smiling. One of them was wearing the same dark grey uniform I had seen on the defenders. The other was younger, civilian clothing, similar facial features. Brothers, perhaps, or father and son. The image was frozen in a moment of normalcy that no longer existed and possibly would never exist again. I stared at it for approximately 15 seconds. The man behind me asked if the compartment was clear. I confirmed clearance. We moved to the next door, but I kept thinking about the image, about the two men smiling, about the fact that one of them might be dead already, killed in the corridors during our advance, or might still be alive somewhere on this ship, huddled in a compartment like this one, waiting for us to breach his door. I tried to stop thinking about it. Thinking about it degraded efficiency. I had objectives. I had function. The image was irrelevant data. I archived it, filed it, attempted to continue. But the filing system was becoming corrupted. Too many images, too many faces. The young man with the last pistol, the enemy combatant bleeding out in the storage compartment, the man crushed by the hydraulic door. They accumulated. The archive expanded. The corruption spread. We pushed deeper into the ship, encountered a major defensive position at a junction of 3 primary corridors. They had constructed proper fortifications this time, armored barriers, heavy weapons emplacements, overlapping fields of fire. We lost 6 men in the first assault, pulled back, regrouped. Valen called for breaching charges. We blew the deck plating beneath the defensive position and came up through the floor, flanked them from below, killed them from behind, while they were still oriented on the corridor they expected us to push through. It was efficient. It was brutal. It was necessary. That was what Valen said afterward. Necessary. The word felt hollow. Everything felt hollow. I had transitioned from processing combat as a series of tactical problems to processing combat as an industrial operation. We were not soldiers fighting enemy soldiers. We were components in a machine designed to convert resistance into corpses. The machine was efficient. The machine did not question its function. I was part of the machine. I tried to remember what I had been before the machine, before the training, before the conditioning, before they had taken a person and converted him into Breacher 3-014. I had fragments. My name had been Marcus. Marcus? Something similar. I could not access the exact spelling. I had been from a hive city. Lower levels. Industrial sector. My father had worked in the Prometheum refineries. I had a memory of heat and chemical smell, and the sound of processing machinery running in endless shifts. The memory was old, corrupted, possibly inaccurate. I was no longer certain which details were authentic recollection, and which were artifacts of degraded data storage. It did not matter. The person who had been Marcus or Marcus no longer existed in any meaningful sense. He had been processed. The Imperium had fed him into the recruitment system and the training regimen and the conditioning protocols, and what emerged was Breacher 3-014. A component, a function, an element of the boarding machine. That was what remained. That was all that remained. We secured the ship after 31 hours of continuous operation. The crew surrendered once we controlled engineering, and they realized their reactors were in our hands. Valen accepted the surrender, processed the crew through detention protocols. Command ordered the ship salvaged. It had cargo they wanted, industrial materials, weapons components, things that had value. The crew had no value. Command did not say what would happen to them. Command did not need to say. We knew. Everyone knew. The Imperium did not waste resources maintaining prisoners who had no intelligence value and no skills that could be exploited. I did not participate in the prisoner processing. I was assigned to security detail in the secured sections. I stood in a corridor and watched crew members file past under guard. They did not look at me. They looked at the deck, at their feet, at nothing. Their expressions were, I will not describe their expressions. I observed them. I archived the observations. I did not process what they meant. There was a third boarding, a fourth. The operations began to blur together. Different ships, same corridors. Different defenders, same deaths. The machine continued its function. I continued my function as part of the machine. Somewhere during the fifth or sixth operation, I stopped trying to remember my name. It was irrelevant information. Breacher 3, 014 was sufficient designation. Function was sufficient identity. But the archive continued to corrupt. More images, more faces, more moments that should have been irrelevant, but somehow were not. A defender who called out before dying. I did not understand the language, but I understood the tone. He was calling for someone, calling a name, the same name 3 times. Then silence. A crew member we found in a sealed compartment. He had been there for 9 hours, according to the timestamp on his chronometer. Alone in the dark. When we opened the door, he did not move, did not respond. His eyes were open, but he was not seeing us. Shock, probably. Or his mind had simply stopped processing input when the processing became unbearable. We removed him, sent him to detention. I do not know what happened to him after that. Another boarding. This one was smaller, escort vessel. The corridors were extremely narrow, 1.8 meters. I had to move sideways in some sections. My armor scraped both walls simultaneously. The defenders fought harder here. They had nowhere to retreat. Every meter we advanced was a meter they lost forever. They made us pay for each one. We lost 15 men securing a ship that held a crew of 40. The mathematics were unfavorable. Command did not care about the mathematics. The ship had been providing escort to a transport we wanted. We took the transport. We took the escort. We took everything. I killed a man with my hands during that boarding. My shotgun had jammed. My knife was embedded in someone else. He came at me in a corridor too narrow for effective maneuvering. We grappled, fell against the wall. His helmet smashed against mine. I could see his eyes through his visor, wide, desperate. He was trying to reach his sidearm. I got my hands around his throat. The armor made it difficult. Gloves are not designed for precise grip. But I managed. I squeezed. He struggled, stopped struggling. I confirmed cessation, retrieved my knife from the other body, continued. That night is not accurate. The ship operated on standard cycle time, and I was not sleeping during designated rest periods. But the word persists in my vocabulary, so I use it. That night I stood in the crew quarters they had assigned to us, and I looked at my hands. They were shaking. Minor tremor, possibly fatigue, possibly something else. I tried to stop the shaking. Could not. I sat on the bunk and held my hands together and waited for the tremor to subside. It took 40 minutes. Valen noticed. He asked if I was combat effective. I confirmed I was. He observed me for 10 seconds, said nothing more, turned, and left. I sat there and continued to hold my hands together, and wondered if this was what corruption looked like, if the archive was failing, if the conditioning was degrading, if the component was breaking down. There was a 7th boarding, an 8th. I lost count somewhere after the 10th. The operations continued. The machine continued. I continued. But the continuity was fracturing. Moments would disappear. I would be in a corridor, and then suddenly I would be in a different corridor with no memory of the transition. I would be firing my weapon, and the magazine would be empty, and I would have no recollection of discharging the rounds. Time became unreliable. Events became disconnected. Valen pulled me from active rotation after I do not remember which boarding it was. 14th, 16th, he said I needed recalibration. He used that word, recalibration, as if I were machinery that had fallen out of tolerance. Perhaps I was. Perhaps that was the most accurate description available. He sent me to the Medicae section. The Medicae officer was not interested in conversation. He ran diagnostics, physical examination, cognitive testing, checked my responses, checked my conditioning implants. The implants were functioning within normal parameters. The conditioning was holding. The component was not mechanically defective, but something was wrong. The officer noted it in his records. Psychological degradation, combat fatigue, exposure trauma. He had terminology for it, specific classifications. He assigned me a designation within his taxonomy of broken soldiers. Then he prescribed a treatment protocol. The protocol involved medication, chemical compounds designed to suppress certain neurological processes, stabilize emotional response, reduce intrusive recollection. I took the medication as prescribed. It made everything feel distant, not absent, distant. The faces in the archive were still there, but they were behind a barrier now. I could perceive them, but I could not access the emotional weight they carried. The corruption was still spreading, but I could no longer feel it spreading. I returned to active rotation. The boarding operations continued. I performed my function, breached corridors, cleared compartments, killed defenders. The medication made it easier, or perhaps it made it harder. I could no longer differentiate. Easy and hard implied subjective evaluation. I was not supposed to evaluate subjectively. I was supposed to function objectively. The medication helped with that. The medication was effective. There was a man during one of the later boardings. I do not remember which boarding. They were all similar by then. He was wounded. Leg injury. He could not walk. He was sitting in a corridor, trying to apply a tourniquet. He looked up when we approached. He did not reach for a weapon. He just looked at us, waited. Valen shot him. Standard procedure. Do not render aid to enemy wounded. Neutralize and continue. The man fell sideways. His hands were still holding the tourniquet. He had been trying to save himself. The mathematics had not favored his survival. I felt nothing observing this. The medication ensured I felt nothing. That was what the medication was designed to do. I archived the observation, filed it alongside all the other observations. The archive was enormous now. Thousands of entries. Faces, voices, final moments, compartments, corridors, the temperature of blood cooling on deck plating, the sound of ammunition feeding into weapons, the particular way light flickered in damaged sections when power systems were failing. All of it filed. All of it archived. All of it distant behind the medications barrier. We boarded a station. Not a ship. An orbital platform. Military installation. The corridors were even more confined than ship passages. Defensive architecture, designed to channel attackers into kill zones. We lost 40% of our force securing the primary access levels. I survived. I always survived. Survival was random. I understood that. There was no skill involved, beyond basic tactical competence. You either took the round that killed you, or you did not. You either stood in the place where the grenade landed, or you stood 1 meter to the left. Chance. Pure chance. I had been fortunate in my positioning 47 times. Others had not. I thought about that. About the randomness. About how easily I could have been one of the bodies in the corridors instead of one of the components still functioning. The thought was troubling. Not frightening. The medication prevented fear. Just troubling. An equation that refused to balance. Why was I still functional when so many others had ceased? What was the variable that determined continuation versus termination? There was no variable. There was only chance. That was the answer. I disliked the answer. Answers should contain meaning. Chance contained no meaning. It simply was. I archived the dissatisfaction. Continued functioning. The station was secured after 60 hours. We held it for 3 days, while Command decided whether to maintain or destroy it. They decided destruction. We placed charges in the reactor spaces and the primary structural supports. Evacuated to our ships, watched from a distance as the charges detonated. The station came apart slowly, pieces drifting outward, metal flowers blooming in the void. It was beautiful. That observation surprised me. I had not expected to register beauty. The medication was supposed to suppress aesthetic response, along with emotional response. Perhaps it was degrading. Perhaps I was degrading. Perhaps there was no difference. There were more boardings. I stopped maintaining count. 2 dozen, 3 dozen, more. The operations blurred into a continuous flow. Insert, breach, clear, secure, insert, breach, clear, secure. The pattern repeated. The machine continued. I was part of the machine. I performed my function. The medication ensured I performed without hesitation, without question, without the corruption that had nearly compromised my effectiveness. But something was changing. Even behind the medication's barrier, something was changing. I began to notice patterns. Not tactical patterns. Human patterns. The way defenders moved when they knew they were going to die. The way crew members looked at each other when they thought we were not observing. The way someone would place themselves between us and someone else, even when placement meant certain death. Protection. That was the behavior. Sacrificial positioning. One person attempting to shield another from harm they knew was coming. I did not understand it. The mathematics made no sense. If both individuals were going to be neutralized regardless of positioning, what did protective placement accomplish? It did not change the outcome. It only changed the sequence. Yet the behavior persisted. I observed it across multiple boardings. Different ships, different crews, same behavior pattern. Someone would always try to protect someone else. Always. I mentioned this to Valen during one of the rest periods. He looked at me strangely, asked if the medication was still effective. I confirmed it was. He told me to stop thinking about patterns. Thinking degraded efficiency. I should focus on function. I agreed. I stopped mentioning the patterns, but I continued observing them. The archive continued recording them. The corruption continued spreading. There was a boarding where we breached into a crew section and found them waiting, not armed, not fighting, just waiting. 37 crew members standing in a cargo bay with their hands visible and their postures non-threatening. They surrendered immediately, offered no resistance. We secured them. Sent them to detention. Later I learned they had sabotaged their own ship's life support before surrendering. They had set a timer. The system would fail 3 hours after our breach. They knew we would be occupied securing other sections. They knew we would not check the environmental systems until we noticed the degradation. They were attempting to kill us with our own success. We discovered the sabotage with 40 minutes remaining. Reversed it. Secured the system. None of them admitted responsibility during interrogation. Perhaps all of them were responsible. Perhaps they had decided collectively that killing us was worth dying to achieve. The mathematics were interesting. They had valued our deaths higher than their continued existence. That was an unusual prioritization. Command ordered them executed. All 37. We formed them into a line and shot them in sequence. It took 11 minutes. I was positioned in the security cordon, ensuring no one attempted to flee. No one attempted to flee. They stood in line and waited their turn, and died when their turn came. The last few showed no additional fear, despite watching 34 others die before them. They knew what was coming. They had known since the moment they surrendered. Perhaps they had known since the moment they sabotaged the life support. The execution was simply confirmation of mathematics they had already solved. I thought about that for a long time afterward, about the decision they had made, about the fact that they had chosen to try killing us, even though the choice guaranteed their own deaths, about whether that choice had meaning. The question troubled me. Meaning was not supposed to be part of the function. I was supposed to breach and clear and secure. Meaning was irrelevant to those operations. But I kept circling back to it. The question persisted. Did their choice have meaning? Did any of this have meaning? The boardings, the deaths, the accumulating archive of faces and final moments? Or was it all just mathematics? Components performing functions within a system designed to convert resistance into compliance? The system did not care about meaning. The system did not require meaning. The system simply operated. I increased my medication dosage. The Medicaid officer had authorized adjustment within specified parameters. I adjusted to the upper limit. The barrier strengthened. The questions became more distant, not absent. Distant. I could perceive them, but I could no longer feel the weight they carried. That was sufficient. That was functional. I continued. There was a boarding where I encountered him. I do not know his name. He was a defender. Standard positioning behind a barricade in a corridor junction. We assaulted the position. He fired. We fired. The exchange lasted 30 seconds. Then his weapon was empty and he was wounded. Shoulder trauma, possibly broken clavicle based on the way he was holding his arm. And we were advancing and he was attempting to retreat. And I reached him first. He was young. Most of them were young. This one was possibly 17 standard years, possibly younger. He had dropped his weapon. His hands were empty. He was backing away. His eyes were fixed on my weapon. On me. His expression was... I will not describe his expression. I raised my shotgun. Aimed center mass. Standard procedure. Neutralize retreating combatants. They might rearm. They might regroup. Neutralization prevents future resistance. I did not fire. I do not know why I did not fire. My finger was on the trigger. The weapon was ready. The target was clear. All parameters were satisfied. But I did not fire. I stood there and aimed and did not fire. And he backed away another step and another, and then turned and ran and disappeared into a side passage and was gone. Valen had observed this. He approached and asked why I had not fired. I did not have an answer. He repeated the question. I told him I did not know. He stared at me for 5 seconds. Then he told me to report to Medicaid after the operation was complete. I confirmed I would. We continued the assault, secured the section, achieved the objectives. I went to Medicaid. The Medicaid officer increased my dosage beyond the parameters he had previously authorized. He said the conditioning was degrading. He said prolonged exposure to boarding operations sometimes produced this effect. He said I was displaying reluctance behaviors. Reluctance was a component failure state. It could not be tolerated. The increased medication would suppress it. I would return to normal function. I would continue to perform. I took the increased dosage. It made everything feel even more distant. Not just the emotions and the questions. Everything. The corridors felt distant. The combat felt distant. My own body felt distant, as if I were operating it remotely rather than inhabiting it. But I could still function. The distance did not prevent function. Function continued. More boardings, more corridors, more defenders, more deaths. The machine continued. I continued. But something fundamental had fractured. I could not identify what had fractured. The conditioning implants were functioning. The medication was effective. My combat performance remained within acceptable parameters, but something had changed. Something had broken. I existed in a state of functional damage. I performed my assigned tasks, while simultaneously recognizing that performance was hollowing me out, removing whatever had been inside the component and replacing it with nothing, with distance, with void. I was standing in a corridor after one of the later boardings. I no longer remember which. They were all identical by then, and I realized I could not remember the last time I had spoken, when speech was not required by protocol. Could not remember the last time I had thought about something that was not directly related to tactical operations. Could not remember the last time I had felt anything that was not suppressed immediately by medication. I had become what the system required me to become, a component that functioned, nothing more, nothing less. Just function. The archive had become enormous by then. Tens of thousands of entries. Every face I had seen die. Every corridor I had fought through. Every compartment I had cleared. Every moment recorded, filed, stored in corrupted memory that I could no longer access without feeling the distance the medication created. The archive was there. I was there. But we were separated by a barrier that prevented connection. I could know the archive existed without being able to feel what it contained. That was the medication's purpose. That was what allowed continued function. There was one more boarding. I will describe this one because this one was different. This one was when I understood what I had become, what the machine had made me, what I had allowed myself to become, by continuing to function when function required surrender of everything that was not function. We breached a transport ship. Small crew. Light defenses. The operation should have been simple. We pushed through the initial corridors, encountered minimal resistance, reached the crew sections and found them mostly evacuated. They had retreated to a central compartment, barricaded themselves inside. We prepared to breach. Valen ordered charges placed. The door was reinforced. Standard breaching protocols would not be sufficient. We needed explosive entry. The charges were placed. We took positions. The charges detonated. The door blew inward. We entered. There were children inside. I do not know why there were children on a military transport. Perhaps they were crew family. Perhaps the ship served dual purposes. Perhaps the explanation does not matter. There were children inside, 7 of them, ages ranging from perhaps 6 to 12 standard years. They were with 9 adults, crew members probably. The adults were positioned between us and the children. Protective placement, the behavior I had observed so many times. Sacrificial positioning. Valen ordered them to move away from the children. The adults did not move. Valen repeated the order. Still no movement. He raised his weapon. They still did not move. They knew they were going to die. They were choosing to die positioned between us and the children. The mathematics made no sense. We could kill them and the children both. Their positioning changed nothing. But they did not move. Valen shot the first adult, the one directly in front. Center mass. The adult fell. The others closed the gap, maintained the barrier, maintained the protective positioning. Valen shot the second adult, the third, the fourth. The pattern continued. 9 adults, 9 shots, 9 bodies. The children were screaming. The sound was high-pitched, continuous, overwhelming. I had heard screaming before. Combat produces screaming. But this was different. This was, I do not have adequate terminology. The children were exposed now. No barrier. No protection. Valen turned to face them, raised his weapon. I understood what was going to happen. Standard procedure. No prisoners who could not be exploited. Children had no exploitation value. Therefore, they were tactical liabilities. Resources expended on containment. Potential intelligence leaks if released. The mathematics supported neutralization. The procedure was clear. I shot Valen. Center back. The round penetrated his armor at the spine junction. He fell forward. Did not move after impact. Immediate cessation. The other breachers turned toward me. 3 of them. Weapons raised. I dropped my shotgun. Raised my hands. Made no threatening movements. Waited. They did not fire. They stood there with their weapons aimed at me, and they did not fire. I think they were trying to process what had just occurred. Component failure. A breacher had terminated his unit commander. The action did not fit within any protocol they had been trained to execute. They were waiting for instructions that would not come. Valen had been the instruction source. Valen was dead. They waited. I told them to secure the children and report the situation to command. My voice was strange, distant, as if someone else was speaking. One of them asked why I had fired. I did not answer. I did not have an answer that fit within their framework. I had acted without calculation, without processing. Something had bypassed the medication and the conditioning and the function orientation, and had simply acted. I did not understand what that something was. I did not understand why it had acted, when it had remained dormant through dozens of boardings and hundreds of deaths. They secured me, bound my hands, took my weapons, secured the children, reported to command. Command ordered us to hold position. Wait for command staff to arrive. We waited. I sat on the deck with my hands bound, and I looked at the 9 bodies, and I tried to understand what I had done. The mathematics were clear. I had terminated a loyal component of the Imperial boarding machine. I had prioritized enemy non-combatants over Imperial personnel. I had violated every protocol I had been conditioned to follow. I had failed my function completely. But the children were still screaming. That sound was cutting through the medication and the conditioning and reaching something that should have been suppressed years ago. I looked at them, and I saw. I do not know what I saw. Not statistics, not tactical elements. Something else. Something the archive had been accumulating without my conscious awareness. All those faces, all those final moments, all those protective placements that made no mathematical sense. They had been teaching me something. The archive had been teaching me something. I had not been listening, or I had been listening but the medication had prevented comprehension. Command staff arrived 6 hours later. They interviewed the other breachers. They examined Valen's body. They examined me. A senior officer asked me why I had fired. I told him I did not know. He asked again. I gave the same answer. He asked a 3rd time. I told him the children were screaming. He said that was not an explanation. I agreed. It was not an explanation. It was just what had happened. The children had been screaming, and something inside me had decided that the screaming had to stop, and the only way to stop it was to prevent what was going to happen next, and the only way to prevent that was to shoot Valen. The officer processed this. He asked if I understood the consequences. I confirmed I understood. Termination of Imperial personnel was a capital offense, particularly termination of command staff. The penalty was execution. The mathematics were simple. I had broken function. Broken components were disposed of. I would be disposed of. He told me I would be detained, pending formal review, that the review would determine final disposition, that I should prepare testimony explaining my actions. I told him I had no testimony to provide, beyond what I had already stated. He said that was insufficient. I agreed. It was insufficient, but it was all I had. They took me to a detention cell, small compartment, 2 meters by 3 meters, single bunk, no amenities, the door sealed. I sat on the bunk and waited. The medication was wearing off. I had not received my scheduled dosage. Without the medication, the barrier was dissolving. The archive was becoming accessible again. All those faces, all those moments, they flooded back. The weight crushed inward. I felt everything I had not permitted myself to feel for years. The accumulated weight of dozens of boardings and hundreds of deaths and thousands of moments when I had chosen function over recognition of what function required me to do. I understood finally what I had become, what the Imperium had made me. I was a component designed to convert living beings into corpses. That was my function. That was my purpose. The training, the conditioning, the medication, all of it had been designed to optimize that conversion process, to remove hesitation, to eliminate moral calculation, to ensure I would breach and clear and secure, without pausing to consider what those actions meant to the people on the receiving end of them. The system was efficient. The system was effective. The system had processed thousands of individuals like me, taken people and converted them into components of the boarding machine. We were ammunition. Sophisticated, trained, conditioned ammunition that could move through corridors and make tactical decisions and clear compartments, but ammunition nonetheless. We were fired into enemy ships, and we did what ammunition does. We destroyed targets. When we were expended, when we broke or degraded or failed function, the system discarded us and loaded fresh ammunition. I had been functional ammunition for years. I had performed flawlessly. I had killed efficiently. I had never questioned, never hesitated, never allowed recognition of what I was doing to degrade my effectiveness. The medication had ensured that. The conditioning had ensured that. I had been exactly what the system required, until I was not. Until something in the archive had accumulated enough weight to break through the suppression and force recognition. Until the screaming children had triggered whatever remained of Marcus or Marcus underneath the designation Breacher 3014. Until the component had remembered it had once been something other than a component. I sat in that cell, and I thought about all the people I had killed. I could not count them. The number was too large. Dozens, certainly. Possibly hundreds. Some had been armed defenders, fighting to protect their ships and crew. Some had been wounded and helpless. Some had been surrendering. Some had been running away. I had killed them all, according to protocol, according to function, according to the mathematics that said neutralization prevented future resistance, and therefore neutralization was optimal behavior. I thought about the enemy combatant in the storage compartment during my first boarding, the one I had watched bleed out. I had not killed him, but I had not helped him. I had stood there and counted his breaths and watched him die and done nothing. The mathematics had said intervention was not required. The mathematics had been correct, but correctness was not the same as rightness. I understood that now. The medication had prevented me from understanding the distinction. Function did not recognize the distinction, but I was recognizing it now. I thought about all the protective placements I had observed, all those people who had stood between us and others knowing they would die, the adults in front of the children, the crew member who had pushed another behind him before we fired. The old officer who had positioned himself at the front when his crew surrendered. They had all known the mathematics. They had all known their positioning would not change the outcome. They had positioned themselves anyway. Not because it changed the mathematics, because it changed the meaning. Because dying while trying to protect someone meant something, even if the protection failed. That was what the archive had been teaching me. That was what I had failed to understand until the children screamed. Meaning existed independent of mathematics. Actions had value beyond their tactical outcomes. The system did not recognize this. The system only recognized function and efficiency and optimal resource allocation. But the people inside the system recognized it. The crew members, the defenders, the children crying over protective bodies that had failed to protect them. They all understood something the system did not. I understood it now, too late for it to matter, too late to undo what I had done, too late to change the fact that I had functioned for years as a component in a machine designed to consume people and convert them into compliance, or corpses. But I understood. The component had remembered it was a person. The ammunition had recognized it had once been human. Recognition changed nothing, but recognition existed. That would have to be sufficient. They came for me 3 days later, 2 guards. They took me to a hearing chamber. A tribunal had been convened, 3 officers. They reviewed the evidence. They heard testimony from the breachers who had witnessed the incident. They asked if I had any statement. I told them I did not. They asked if I understood the charges. I confirmed I understood. They asked if I contested the facts. I confirmed I did not. The facts were accurate. I had terminated Sergeant Valen. I had violated protocol. I had failed function. The component was broken. Disposal was appropriate. They deliberated for 11 minutes. The verdict was predetermined. The sentence was predetermined. They were following procedure, ensuring the record reflected proper institutional process. They returned and announced the verdict: guilty. The sentence: execution, immediate, no appeals, no delays. Broken components were disposed of efficiently. The system did not tolerate waste. They took me to an execution chamber, small room, empty except for a chair and a guard. They seated me, bound me to the chair. The guard asked if I had final words. I told him I did not. What could I say? That I was sorry? Sorry to whom? To Valen? To the Imperium? To the hundreds of people I had killed while I was functional. Words would not carry meaning sufficient to the weight I was trying to express. Silence was more honest. The guard raised his last pistol, aimed at my head. Execution at close range ensured immediate cessation. No suffering. The Imperium was efficient even in disposal. I looked at him. He looked at me. I saw his expression. Professional. Detached. He was performing a function. Executing broken components was part of his duty cycle. I was simply the component being processed at this particular moment. Tomorrow he would process another. The day after, another still. The system continued. The machine continued. Components were disposed of and replaced, and the function never stopped. I thought about the young defender I had not shot, the one who had run away. I wondered if he had survived, if he was still alive somewhere, breathing, existing, continuing, if my failure to kill him had produced any lasting value. Probably not. Probably he had died in a different corridor at a different time by a different weapon. The mathematics did not favor survival in boarding actions, but possibility existed. Small possibility. Insignificant possibility. I chose to believe the possibility was sufficient. The guard's finger tightened on the trigger. I closed my eyes. The last thing I thought about was the temperature of the corridor during my first boarding. 31 degrees Celsius. The wall had been cold. I had touched it to orient in the smoke. Metal under my hand. Cold and solid and real. Everything that had followed from that moment had led here. To this chair. To this end. The component had functioned until it broke. The system had disposed of the broken component. The mathematics were complete. The equation was balanced. Nothing remained except the execution of the sentence. I waited for the shot, waited for cessation, waited for the archive to stop recording and the function to finally end. The temperature had been 31 degrees. I held on to that detail. It was mine. The system had not taken it. The medication had not suppressed it. 31 degrees. Cold metal under my hand. A moment when I had still been a person who counted seconds and noticed temperatures and thought maybe surviving mattered. Before I became ammunition. Before I became a component. Before I understood what the machine required and what I had allowed myself to become to satisfy that requirement. 31 degrees. I opened my eyes. The guard was still aiming, still waiting. I nodded. He fired. The archive stopped recording.